Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special meeting of council for October 18th. Bienvenue à la réunion spéciale du conseil du 18 octobre. Premier thème, first item, roll call. I'll ask members of council to please announce themselves. Michael Ternosky, présent.
André Brisson, présent.
Jamie Lauren here.
Cindy Sauce here.
Perfect. Puis notre greffière, Madame Camille Laflamme.
Oui, Monsieur Noir, I'm here.
Parfait, merci beaucoup. Item 2, adoption of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda as presented. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Conseiller Brisson, seconded by Councillor Ternosky. All those in favor? Mike Ternosky, oui.
André, oui.
Jamie, yes.
Cindy Sauce, yes.
Perfect, it is carried. Thank you very much. Item 3, disclosure pecuniary interest. Hearing, seeing none. Item 4, public consultations and hearings. We're here tonight for the Development Charges Study Report FS 34 2021. And the recommendation is that Council receives Report FS 34 2021 dated October 18, 2021, and a presentation from Hemson Consulting Limited. Monsieur Leduc, Monsieur Godin, I'll let you lead us off.
Oui, merci, Monsieur Maire. Bonsoir, chers membres du Conseil. So tonight we're at one of the final steps for the adoption of our DC study, and a very important step is at the public consultation, so an opportunity for the public to provide comments and ask questions. So we do have today with us from Hemson Consulting, Andrew Mirabella and Natalia Kalbas. Andrew is going to be going through a presentation, so we're going to start off with that. So with that, Andrew, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Richard. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Mirabella, Senior Consultant at Hemson. And as Richard introduced, Natalia is also with me on the line, my colleague who is working closely with us on the preparation of this study. I have a presentation, and I will share my screen, and let me know if you don't see it. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Yeah, we see
Everyone
it.
see it? Perfect,
Yep.
Thank you. So as Richard pointed out, today's meeting is a statutory public meeting required by Section 12 of the Development Charges Act, which the purpose of this meeting is to provide the public with an opportunity to make any representation on the proposed DC background study and bylaw, which was made public. Both the DC background study and proposed bylaw were made available in advance of this meeting, consistent with the requirements and the deadlines outlined prescribed by the Development Charges Act, with the study being September 15th and the bylaw October 4th of 2021. So just to go over a couple of the agenda items today, we'll go through some of the background development charges in Russell Township in terms of our study process, how we calculated the rates. I'll go through a brief overview of the capital program in terms of what costs are considered to be development charge eligible and what share of those costs are actually included for in the recovery of the DCs that we have calculated here, both on the residential and your non-residential sector. And then we'll look at a rate comparison with some neighboring communities and municipalities, and we'll talk a little bit about timeline and next steps at the end of the meeting, and obviously leave the floor open for any council or public comments on the study or the presentation itself. So just in terms of the background, council passed your last bylaw on December 12th, 2016, that imposed development charge rates for a series of services, relates to parks and recreation, roads, fire, and water, wastewater services. And obviously there's a couple other categories there. The key requirements of the development charges in order to pass a new bylaw is we have to prepare a DC background study, which we've done, and we've made that public. We have to hold the public meeting, which is the purpose of today's session. And then following that, council has to pass a new bylaw, and that bylaw has a shelf life of 5 years. Your current bylaw expires on December 12th, 2021, which is the kind of put in the great importance here to make sure that we have a new bylaw in place in advance of that expiry in order for you to continue collecting development charges for new development. So in terms of our study process, this really kind of summarizes a bit of a schematic and simplifies kind of a lot of the detailed work that we've done. But we start off with a development forecast, looking at the amount, type, and location of development. We have to do a kind of a historical service level analysis that looks at what the average level of service was provided in the municipality over the preceding 10 years, immediately preparing or for the preparation of a background study. Then we look at all the capital costs that are required in order to service development. And of those growth-related capital needs, not all those costs are considered to be DC eligible. There's a series of deductions that have to be made in accordance with the legislation. And once we've made those deductions from any grants or replacement shares or available DC reserves and so on, there's a cost or a share eligible for recovery. And that development charge eligible recovery share is then delineated between your residential and your non-residential sector. Residentially, the charges are on a per unit basis. Non-residentially, the charges on a per square foot or per square meter of gross floor area. And that sets the basis for the calculated rate. We'll run through some of those key assumptions here today, and then obviously what the output is, the end result being the calculated charges. So just to provide a bit of an overview of our development forecast and our summary, this graph looks at the census population, households, and place of work employment over the preceding period from 2006, estimated out to 2021, and then our forecast period. Really, the short story here is that the development trends have been certainly on the rise in the last several years, and that level of activity, in our view, based on the analysis and discussion of staff, is expected to continue throughout this planning period, both in terms of population and households. And with that, we are seeing a kind of a continued increase in the employment sector. Certainly the amount and quantum of development that we're anticipating over this planning period, particularly on the household side, is greater than what we've seen in kind of that 2006 to 2016 period, but more in line with more recent trends, but still a bit more conservative outlook from the last couple of years, which has definitely been on the high. So moderating kind of the previous period, and as well as kind of what we've been seeing in the last few years in terms of permit activity, but still a pretty high number of unit growth, about 240 units to 240 units a year over the next 10 years. So with that kind of development that's occurring or planning to occur, we have just a summary of the total gross related program for the general services category. And of those 10-year general services categories, from libraries, parks, daycare, all the way through development related studies, we have a total program cost of about $65.13 million. And the table looks at all those required adjustments to the calculation that we have to make before we actually arrive at the far right column, being our total DC eligible cost for recovery. And we see here that of that $65 million, there's a significant share of costs that are kind of incorporated and identified in the study, but not actually eligible for DC recovery in this planning period to 2031, the 10-year period. So we're really looking at, about 25% of your total cost, 17.35, that's actually considered for in the calculation of the rate. A share of the program, 12.9 million, is considered to be a replacement or benefit to existing share, meaning that it's not actually considered or eligible for DC funding. It would have to be funded from other sources, property tax, utility rates, if they're non-growth related. There's available DC reserves from collections that have already occurred of about 7.2 million. And then we have that other development related column, which means that although we've identified them as growth related and development charge eligible or other funding sources available, they aren't considered for recovery in this study, partly because of service level restrictions from the preceding period. So we've identified them as growth related. They can be funded in future DC studies or other kind of development related studies, such as community benefits charges, if the municipality ever does undertake one. They are considered growth, but not considered in this DC planning period and not considered for the development charge calculation. That gives us that residual of the total DC eligible cost for recovery at 17.35 million. So you may ask, what kind of projects are included, and obviously the background study, Appendix B, provides a very detailed list of everything that's incorporated at a high level. What's driving that is, we have library costs in terms of new branch and branch expansion. Parks and Recreation is by far the largest component of the total gross related program, and that really accounts for the recreation complex and facility, which is your new arena and pool. We have various amenities also incorporated within that. Fire protection, there's new vehicles, equipment incorporated into the DC capital. And then we also have other kind of development related components. We have additional daycare space, provision for it, development related studies, additional police capital equipment, by law enforcement equipment, all kind of adding up to the total of that $65 million growth program. But again, your Parks and Recreation related share is by far the largest component of the gross program, and it's also by far the largest component of your development related share, recoverable share, that we saw in that previous slide. That's on the general services. Then we look at kind of the more engineering related services broken in between services related to a highway, which is your roads and public works, and water and wastewater type infrastructure. The total program cost here is $46.7 million. And same methodology applies in terms of considerations in terms of the rate calculation deductions to it. As we move across the table, we see here that we have a program or DC eligible program cost for about $29.8 million. So still a fairly reduced amount from that $46.7 million, but a higher recoverable share on the engineering side relative to what we saw on the development on the general services side before. Partly related to, and most of the costs in here are the recovery of costs that have already been incurred, particularly on your water and your wastewater infrastructure, in which the infrastructure has been in place, and we're just recovering for those past expenditures that are still related to future development. So what projects are driving the capital program here? We have public works, we have the snow dump facility, building expansion, some new fleet and equipment. In terms of roads and related, there's various road improvement projects that we have, from routes 300, 500, St. Thomas, St. Augustine, all incorporated into the capital program. We have intersection improvements at 10 different locations, and we have multi-use pathway developments. And then again, as I mentioned, on the water and the wastewater side, it's the recovery of both past expenditures, as well as kind of sewage pumping station upgrades and above ground reservoir expansions on the water side. So keeping into consideration both the quantum of the development that's looking to occur, and second to that, the capital costs that are looking to be recovered, both on the general service side and the engineering services side. The table here in the slide really looks at the maximum allowable charges that can be permissible under the Development Charges Act. And we're looking here at an urban service unit. The table on the right is the charges on a dwelling unit type basis, with a single and semi-detached dwelling unit calculated to be $23,129, and the rates are differentiated by dwelling unit type and size based on the occupancy patterns. So an apartment with a bachelor and one bedroom would pay $9,600 for per development charge, whereas I mentioned the single and semi-detached unit would be $23,129, and then the gap and the variances between them based on how many people are living in each of the houses and the various demands they place on services within them is how the charges are set. The graph on the left there, the pie graph, looks at, well, of that $23,000 in terms of our single and semi-detached dwelling unit, how do we actually make up that charge, and where does the money go to the different services? And you see here that the distribution of the charge between the different categories of service that we've talked about. The obvious kind of item here, in my view, is twofold. One, a big portion of the charge, about 50%, is directly related to water and wastewater infrastructure. Your engineered services related to a highway make up the other largest component here of the rate. And then second to that is your Parks and Recreation charge in itself. So about 2/3 of your charge is engineering related between water, wastewater, and roads. And then your Parks and Recreation adds another layer to that of about 30% of that total rate, and most of which is on the Parks and Recreation side, again related to kind of the new recreation center that we've spoke about in the previous slide as well. And this is for an urban service unit. Just to keep in mind that if you're developing in a rural area and not connected on water and water and sewer services are not available, you would pay the charge less the water and wastewater, which would be for a single family detached dwelling unit about $11,900. So how does that compare to the rates that are currently in force? The current charges are about $18,500. The calculated rates about $23,000, which gives us an increase of about $4,680 on a single family detached dwelling unit. On terms of the dollar value, it's $4,680. On a percentage basis, it's about 25%. Again, in terms of the total quantum of the change, we're really looking at a variation in water, wastewater, your services related to a highway, and recreation is driving the complete rate change here of that $4,680. Half of that is your Parks and Recreation charge in itself. Again, driven by the kind of capital program heavy program that we've seen in the previous slide as well. So you may ask then, how does that rate compare to some other communities? So the current charge and the calculated charge for Russell Township is highlighted in red. The remaining or other areas of municipalities are in green. Some of your direct neighbors of Ottawa, Clarence, Rockland, North Grenville and such, all are higher than the rates calculated here in Russell Township. Some other communities in here which do surround you, such as Castleman or Hawkesbury, obviously, are kind of on the lower end of the spectrum. One thing I do want to stress here with the comparison of this type is the servicing requirements and infrastructure that's needed in each of these individual communities is unique, and it's definitely reflective of solely the needs of that community. So what infrastructure is required to support growth of one community is obviously going to be different from another one, which obviously has an impact on the rates that are calculated at the end. So although we do show what the comparison is here, we just have to be cognizant of there's obviously differences in the infrastructure and the growth that's kind of requiring that level of activity, and which will obviously driving the DC rates that are in each community. We've done here both the municipal wide and the upper tier charges. Any school board charges that may exist would be levied in addition to that and not included in here, as well as any area specific development charges would be captured and kind of incorporated in addition to those where they do exist. That was the residential ones. On the non-residential side, we've done the same maximum allowable rates. The charges here are serviced and unserviced. On the service side, it's $59.29. On the unserviced side, it's $14.95 per square meter. For reference purposes, we've shown what those charges are on a per square foot basis. $5.51 per square foot for a serviced area, and $1.39 in the unserviced area. Particularly for non-residential development, we'll see that the relationship to your engineered services is even greater for the non-residential sector, which almost 37% and 38% respectively for wastewater and water is driving the total charge here. So over almost 75% of the rate is water and wastewater related. The remaining is services related to a highway and some minor shares from fire, police, and development related studies. In terms of the comparison of current versus calculated here, the rate increase is about $7.41 per square meter, so about a 14% rate increase for a service unit, non-residentially per square meter. Again, water and wastewater kind of driving some of those increases, and only a smaller increase, about 2% on the kind of general service side for unserviced non-residential charges. Part of which is that what was driving it on the residential side is some of the new categories of service, as daycare as well as parks and recreation, which doesn't attract the non-residential component. It's completely attributable to residential development for recovery. So just to compare the kind of current versus calculated and with some other communities in terms of your commercial charges, what we're showing here is Russell Township current and calculated in red. Everywhere else is in green. In this particular graph, you're at the kind of low to middle end of the spectrum here relative to other communities on the commercial side, which is servicing with water and wastewater, obviously. Ottawa, Clarence, Rockland, again, on the higher end of the spectrum for the non-residential rates. And again, you put yourselves kind of on the low to middle end of the pack. Your rates, although they're on the low end, they're still kind of within a certain margin of some of the other ones that are even marginally above you. And obviously over time, depending on the servicing needs, that might all change with new DC studies. The only thing I guess I will point out here in addition to that is the Smith Falls. We've shown them here, they're the calculated rates, but those rates aren't enforced by bylaw yet. They're going through the process of implementing a DC charge or DC bylaw. So that could be subject to further revisions and changes as that goes through the finalization process. So just to cap off with some next steps here. So there is an anticipation that a presentation to council will happen with a staff report on November 1st, 2021. If any changes to the bylaw are requested at this particular meeting in terms of the rates and the bylaw being put forward, any comments or questions that we would be looking to hear from the industry or council to be provided prior to October 22nd of 2021, so this Friday. Any questions or responses and submissions that we do receive, we will respond to in a timely manner, kind of in advance of bylaw passage, which we hope to happen on November 15th of 2021. That bylaw passage date is in advance of your existing bylaw expiry in December 2021. The bylaw has been made public and there aren't any significant departures from what was currently put forward in terms of exemptions. So it does remain relatively in line with what we've seen. Obviously the rates have changed and we've updated the bylaw itself with the new legislation and some of the regulatory language in there with some new definitions and such, but it largely is very much as a similar looking bylaw to what you currently have. So with that, that is the end of my presentation and I am happy to take any questions from council at this time.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you very much for the in-depth report. We had a lot of reading to do this weekend. Members of council, do we have any questions? Councillor Saucier.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just curious about like the rate for water and sewer. You said was 11,900. How much has that gone up?
So the rate for water and sewer, 11,900 was the rural rate excluding water and sewer.
Okay.
But the water and sewer rate in itself, it is actually very close to that. It's almost 50-50. But it has gone up 17% residentially for water and 16% for wastewater. So it actually hasn't, it's gone up, but not almost in line with the total cumulative average rate increase, I guess you could say.
And I had one more question. It was in the report. I don't know if you can answer it or not, but there was on table 7 of the DC charge. It was on page 31. There was the unadjusted and adjusted rates, and some increased and some decreased, and I wasn't sure why.
So in terms of the rate increases from a development charge perspective, when we talk about adjusted and unadjusted, those are the charges after cash flow consideration. So we cash flow the DC rates and incorporate interest and financing costs. And in service areas, perhaps where there was reserve fund on hand and the projects were occurring later in the period, we would use those reserve funds to offset the financing costs. So the actual adjusted charges might actually decrease slightly from the adjusted ones. I'm not looking at that table specifically, but that is the general reason as to why you might see some fluctuations between adjusted and unadjusted. And conversely, if the adjusted rate increases from the unadjusted charge, it's because we are incorporating financing costs in addition to that, which is driving up the rates a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saucier. Other questions, comments, members of council? Seeing none, I have a few, Andrew. You mentioned in one of your slides in regards to possible funds, I think it was about 17 million for community benefit charges. That's a whole other process that we have to go through, but can you speak a little bit to the community benefit charges for members of the public who may not understand that?
Certainly, through the mayor. So a community benefits charge is a new, I guess, tool that was introduced by the province. New in the sense of a name, but old in the sense of a Section 37 replacement for kind of high density type developments. And a municipality has the authority to implement a CBC bylaw to fund similar type of growth related capital costs. The capital costs that are growth related have to be different from what's incorporated in the DC bylaw. However, the charge or the CBC is a land value based charge based on a percentage land value, but it can only be applied to high density type development. So it has to be greater than 5 stories and more than 10 units. So that's why I say it's something that the municipality can explore, but really has to be in line with when those types of developments actually start to come online. Because it'd be a bit of a fruitless exercise to go through the process and implement the bylaw when you can't actually levy it on any of those types of developments. So something to consider as time goes on, your development patterns change, but they can be recovered for by that avenue if it's available.
Okay, but again, it's separate from DCs in the sense that it's not for the same projects.
Correct. It has to be. We have to identify the revenue separately. It could be for the same project, but whatever is being funded from DCs, the opposite share has to be from CBCs. You can't be funding the same dollar from both tools. Right.
Do you know in our region, has there any municipalities, City of Ottawa, for example, that have gone through and put this in place off the top of your head?
Yeah, no one in Ontario yet. To my knowledge, and none of the big cities at least have implemented the CBCs just yet. The deadline to do that before your Section 37s come out of are not going to be enforceable is September of 2022. So okay. Most municipalities are working towards that deadline, and I believe the City of Ottawa is also on that same train to have something in place by that time.
Perfect. I see Councillor Lorrain has a question, then Conseiller Brisson.
Yeah, just thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So just confirming what you said there, the eligibility for a municipality is where there's development that is high density, meaning greater than 5 stories, or would 5 stories be acceptable?
So it's 5 or more stories and greater than 10 units.
Okay, 5 or more stories.
Correct.
Okay, because currently we have a maximum capacity of 5 stories in our municipality, although I don't believe we've actually approved a 5-story yet in the municipality. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that one correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. Conseiller Brisson?
Yeah, I was just looking at your diagram for the non-residential, and I was wondering how come before there was some charge for library and recreation, and I see that the calculated now that they had taken it out. I know that it's logical, but how come it was there before?
So that's a good question. So I went through it a bit at the previous council information session. It really comes down to a bit of a methodology difference between us and the firm that prepared your last study, where we consider all service areas or categories of service such as parks and recreation and library to be directly benefiting and driven by residential type development and not residential and not non-residential development. So we allocate all the costs for recovery to the residential sector, where the previous firm allocates a small share to non-residential and still the majority and lion's share to residential. So it's a bit of a change in practice, which we've done and we kind of virtually do in all of our communities, ranging from large and small municipalities. It's a bit of a complex answer, but it is a bit of a just a difference in the approach there.
Follow up, Conseiller Brisson?
It was just also to clarify, because I think the farm is considered non-residential, but is it another class apart? Because I know that before they had a lower rate than the non-residential, but that's why I was wondering if it was still like this for the farm. Since the utility by square meter is not as dense as a store, I know that it was less, but I don't see any separation on it, or if they're excluded or.
So your previous bylaw doesn't have a differentiation for it. Your current bylaw still exempts bona fide farm uses from the payment of DCs.
Okay.
And that's still continued forward in this bylaw.
That's what I just wanted to confirm that was excluded. And okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other follow-up questions? Thank you very much, Andrew. Perhaps for Monsieur Godin, just when I'm looking at the pie chart on page 13, when we're talking about calculated maximum allowable non-residential township-wide DC rates, non-residential charge is $1.39 unserviced, and it's almost $4 more for serviced area. You know, when we talk about possibly servicing the 417 with the land that we just bought moving forward, perhaps have those that calculation in that report to say, I can't remember if it was there or not, but there's obviously increased DCs that come from having an area serviced. So I think that should be taken into consideration when we have those discussions, whether we're moving forward or not. Just something to keep in mind. À 4 piastres du pied carré, you know, there's a huge potential for extra funds coming in if we ever service that area. So, Conseiller Brisson?
Another question, it was your diagram at page 5 with the growth of people and the growth, the other one, it's the census population and the occupied household. Does that mean that there's more people per house? Because you can see that the census population grow a lot faster than the occupied household.
So there's a general relationship between your population that's occurring in your existing base, like the change in it, as well as the population that's going to be arising from new development. And over the forthcoming period, the PPU, so the persons per unit, is actually going to still be modestly declining, consistent with your historic trends. So there's going to be a decline in your existing base, but there's also going to be new people that are coming in to fill these units at a higher occupancy pattern than what's currently available in your existing units. The trend itself is just a graph itself, but the actual relationship is actually moving almost in tandem.
Okay, follow up, Conseiller Brisson?
It's just that I didn't follow up completely what that means.
So it's a bit technical on the demographic side, but when we're talking about the growth in of the 6,600 people, that is looking at the census population growth, and our growth in units is the total growth, right? But our actual occupancy pattern of when you add in your existing base and the new units, we are forecasting that our PPUs, or our population in units, overall in the township is going to continue to decline modestly, and that's shown on the table number. I'm just looking at the table in your background study, but it's shown in Appendix A of the background study. So it goes from about 2.8 people down to about 2.78 people by 2031.
So that just means traditionally in the township we had larger families, possibly in less units, but the trend in the population is smaller families moving forward, and that's reflected, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Other questions, comments, members of council? Anything to add from you, Monsieur Godin?
No, I think Andrew covered pretty much all the important points of the presentation, and council had great questions. I think we can probably move on to if there's public questions or comments at that point in time.
Okay, thank you very much, Monsieur Godin. And just to clarify, Monsieur Godin, my understanding is based on the report, we did meet with all the developers ahead of time. They did have an opportunity to submit questions or comments in regards to the DC study, and they still have time to do so until the next presentation. So at which point, I don't believe we received any formal comments at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So no, that's correct. So we did meet with the development community a couple months ago, and to go over a presentation similar to this one. And there were questions asked at that particular meeting, which were answered. But we've asked since then that they provide us with some comments or additional questions, which we haven't received at this point in time. And like Andrew said, we are still accepting questions or comments until Friday of this week, so that we can incorporate those in the report that's going to be presented to council on November 1st.
Okay, thank you very much, Monsieur Godet. I think the one line that stuck out in all that reading we had was we have obviously a lot of growth in our community, and the fact that a lot of that growth is coming from bigger municipalities or cities such as Ottawa, which the expectation of the residents coming in is for more services. So this is very much DC's, our growth is pushing for growth, should be paying for growth as well. So thank you very much. With that, we'll go to the question period. We do have a question. Charles Armstrong, 85 Castlebeau Street. Dwelling growth is calculated on a 10-year average as noted in Appendix 1, producing a forecast of 2,430 new dwellings of all types in the next 10 years. I note that the Building and Planning Department reported 314 permits issued for new residences in 2020. So simplest extrapolation arrives at 3,140 new dwellings, a significant difference. There seems to be an accelerated growth, so should this not be used for forecasting purposes in the study? I'm not sure if Monsieur Godin and or Andrew can answer that one.
Yeah, through the mayor, that's a good question. You know, we did look at the recent permits that have been pulled to inform this forecast, and you know, it's really a matter of a couple things. One, you know, that's 2020 permit activity, which is in most communities have been a bit of a historical high, 2020 and 2021, and we did look at that from the recent activity, but also kind of balancing against what we've seen in the municipality over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, kind of dating back all the way to 2006. So we are showing a much more increased level of activity from that development trend from kind of 2006 to 2011 census period, but kind of recognizing it's still a big uplift in the kind of forthcoming period from what that was, but a little less than some of the permit activity that we've seen perhaps in the highs of over the last year or two. With that said, there's also the expectation we talk about permits and you know, building permits. We look at occupancies when we talk about the DC study. So you know, we may have a few years worth of influx of permits, but those units then need to go on the market and, you know, be constructed and sold and get occupied. And that's kind of the way the DC forecast is projected. So there's also a bit of a lag in that term. So from kind of all those different counterpoints, the projection is also, you know, kind of in line with what planning anticipates on an average basis over the period. And that's why we redo the studies every 5 years to capture any of those changes that may have occurred outside of what we planned for.
Okay, thank you very much. So it could be an outlier, not necessarily the basis for the calculation. Okay, thank you very much. There's no further questions. If the administrations have nothing else to add, or if Andrew and Natalia have nothing else to add, then we'll just move on with the resolution. I see no hands up. So the resolution motion that council approves all recommendations listed on the agenda under item number 4, public consultations and hearing. I need a mover and a seconder, please, to put it on the table. Moved by Conseiller Larin, seconded by Conseiller Brisson. Questions on the resolution? Seeing none, hearing none, I'll call for the vote.
Mike Tarnowski, yes.
André, oui.
Jamie, yes.
Cindy Sosa, yes.
Thank you very much. That is carried. Confirming bylaw, that bylaw 2021-096 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the corporation and the township of Russell at special council meeting held on October 18th, 2021 be read a first, second, and third time and passed. Need a mover and a seconder to put on the table, please. Moved by Conseiller Lorrain, seconded by Councillor Tarnowski. All those in favor? Councillor Tarnowski, Mike.
Mike Tarnowski, yes.
André, oui.
Jamie, yes.
Cindy Sosa, yes.
Thank you. Confirming bylaw is passed. Our next regular public meeting of council will be held in about 20 minutes. So that's it, everyone. Thank you very much, Monsieur Godin and Andrew, for your teams working on this. We know it was a big project, but we look forward to having further discussion on this. Merci beaucoup. We are adjourned at 5:40 p.m. See you guys in 20 minutes.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.